One of the things I find most striking is the presence of Antarctica on ancient maps, because we didn't discover it until 1820, and yet it's on maps drawn in the 1500s with great detail.
Antarctica is one of the weirdest places on Earth, and from the very beginning, Antarctica has pretty much been a mystery to us.
Now, what the f*** is it doing on a map drawn in the 1500s, which we know was based on older source maps when nobody knew it existed in the 1500s? To me, the obvious answer is we are dealing with the fingerprints of a lost civilization.
For one, the continent is sparsely inhabited, with less than 10,000 people living there. This is despite the fact that Antarctica has a landmass of 13.66 million square kilometers. As one of the most uninhabited places in the world, Antarctica has been the subject of significant exploration, and many people have done their best to uncover some of its biggest secrets. Joe Rogan, arguably the world's most popular podcaster, has been one such person. Over the years, his podcast has played host to several scientists and explorers who have spoken about some of the secrets of this region that you might not know about. Follow us on this journey with Joe Rogan into some of the weirdest and most shocking facts about Antarctica. We'll also be looking into external sources to find out additional facts about this mysterious landmass, opening your eyes to one of the weirdest parts of our entire planet. Operation High Jump and the Missing 411. Joe Rogan has been at his podcast for well over a decade now, and in that time he and his guests have come up with quite a lot of wild theories and arguments. Because of that, it's pretty rare for you to ever see Joe shocked out of his mind. However, back in 2022, he got a pretty shocking revelation that left him stunned. On an episode of his Joe Rogan Experience podcast back in August 2022, Joe had on Sam Tripoli, a fellow podcaster and comedian. There, Sam explained the event of Operation High Jump, a military exercise that happened in Antarctica back in the 20th century, one which involved President Harry Truman, Nazis, and even aliens. To be fair, Operation High Jump did exist. Officially titled the United States Navy Antarctic Development Program, the exercise went on from 1946 to 1947, and it was led by Rear Admiral Richard E. Byrd. The operation consisted of 13 warships, about 4,700 military personnel, and several aerial vehicles and machines. Official records show that Operation High Jump had a simple objective: to train military personnel in extremely cold conditions and to determine the feasibility of establishing military bases in Antarctica. President Harry Truman and the American government had been curious about Antarctica and the fact that the area was largely untapped, and they were looking to pretty much establish American sovereignty over the region. However, Sam explains to Joe that according to journals written by Admiral Byrd, the Navy commander had made contact with the Nazi unidentified flying objects, UFOs. Sam explained that the Nazis had essentially made a deal with aliens to use their superior technology in World War II, although we're not quite sure why this was never used in the actual war or what the aliens were still doing in Antarctica following the conflict's resolution. Anyways, according to Sam, Operation High Jump's top brass eventually went back to the president and explained to him that they had to bring the aliens on board and make a deal with them. The president obliged cutting a deal with the aliens and allowing them to conduct experiments on people, and you won't believe where those experiments were being conducted. Wow, who would have thought that our national parks and forests were so creepy? And if you think this is the end of the tale, then you've got another thing coming. The story of America's pact with the Nazi aliens ends up leading to that of the Missing 411, a series of unsolved cases surrounding people who have gone missing in national parks around the country. The story of the Missing 411 is quite interesting. It documents people who have suddenly disappeared on these national lands, many of whom seem to have several things in common. I think I'll just let Sam explain some of these characteristics. To be fair, some of what Sam is saying here seems like one big conspiracy theory. It also doesn't necessarily bode well when he says that Operation High Jump was sanctioned by President Dwight Eisenhower when it was, in fact, sanctioned by President Truman. Nevertheless, it does raise the question of what is really going on in Antarctica and the types of military exercises that could have gone down there. If you sweat, you die. One of the biggest reasons why Antarctica is so sparsely populated is, unsurprisingly, the fact that it's so cold. Of course, it's no secret that Antarctica is so cold. However, I think a lot of us tend to conveniently underestimate just how freezing this place can be. Like many secluded and scenic places, Antarctica has attracted a lot of adventurers over the years. Whether for digging, running, skiing, or hiking, the adventurers have to abide by a strict dress code if they hope to survive. Even at that, it is important to also make adjustments to your dress code time and again if you hope to survive the unforgiving weather. To give a bit of an insight into this, Joe Rogan once interviewed Colin O'Brady, one of the most popular adventurers and endurance athletes in the world. Colin made a name for himself after he completed the first solo, unsupported, human-powered crossing of Antarctica's landmass back in 2018. And on an episode of the Joe Rogan Experience, he spoke about the entire ordeal and the lengths to which he had to work just to accommodate the weather. You might think Colin was exaggerating here, but he was really not. According to the official tourism website for Antarctica, you could see a stern warning against sweating, especially in the winter. This is because sweat essentially packs your clothes full of moisture. This in turn will freeze the outer layers of your outfit and pretty much melt, causing potentially harmful consequences for when you start to warm up again. For someone like Colin, who had to do a lot of lifting and moving, this can be especially challenging. I like to think of myself as someone who loves a bit of cold from time to time, but none of this looks like fun if you ask me. I mean, how do you even survive in an environment where you can barely sweat without endangering your life? If you plan on visiting Antarctica, I sure hope you have your sweat pores under control. The Antarctic Treaty. By this point, we've pretty much established the fact that you can't necessarily just venture into Antarctica to visit the massive slab of ice and snow. I mean, with the cold and the threat of frostbite, the continent is definitely not necessarily where you just want to venture into willy-nilly. Here's the thing though, even if you did want to visit Antarctica, there's a limit to how much you would be able to do that. This is because of something called the Antarctic Treaty System. As I said earlier, the entire point of that military exercise was to consider if the United States could establish a military base in Antarctica and eventually expand its dominance to cover the entire continent. However, the objective pretty much failed. In 1959, a treaty was signed between 12 countries: Argentina, Australia, Belgium, Chile, France, Japan, New Zealand, Norway, South Africa, the United Kingdom, the United States, and the USSR. The Antarctic Treaty essentially states that the continent doesn't belong to any single country. Just as well, all countries agree to pretty much respect the rights of each other on the continent and only use it for research and a little bit of tourism. The entire point of the treaty is to ensure that the environment is protected and that no man-made activity, including and especially industrialization and war, can threaten the biodiversity of the continent. So the Antarctic Treaty only ensures that all human activity in Antarctica is properly planned and managed. From tourism and exploration to scientific research, everything needs to be done in accordance with the treaty's rules and regulations. While it doesn't prevent tourists or military personnel from being present in Antarctica, anyone looking to be present on